Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Ayse, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Andrea, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted.
It's such an immense pleasure, Ayse. As I was reading about your background, I also have your wonderful book that I absolutely love. And as I was discovering all the amazing things that you have done, from being named Fast Company's most creative person, you've won also numerous design awards, and your work also is available in permanent connections in various renowned museums. I was truly, truly inspired by your journey. And I was wondering if we can start off the interview by having you share the point in your life which inspired you to become a designer and the key factors that you believe contributed to your incredible journey.
Andrea, thank you so much. I actually grew up in a family of lawyers, and it was kind of expected of me to continue into law. But I love to draw, and I figured very early on that, if you're a lawyer, you don't really get to draw. And so I decided that maybe I should become an architect until a family friend came to tea. I was finishing high school, and he said, "Have you heard of industrial design?" And I hadn't. And so he said, "Look," and we were drinking tea. I'm Turkish, so we drink tea all the time. And he said, "Look at this teacup. The edge is curved so that it can fit in our lips better, and it has a handle so that we can hold hot liquid in our hands without burning ourselves. And the saucer is there so that if you drip your tea, you won't, or spill your tea, you won't ruin your mother's beautiful tablecloth." And in that moment, I fell in love with the human scale of industrial design, that this is something that you can hold in your hand. It relates to your body, the human scale of it. And that was the beginning of my journey. And I immediately switched to industrial design, did my undergraduate in Turkey, and then had an opportunity to go to New York for my master's at Pratt Institute. So that was the beginning.
Having lived in your younger days in Turkey, in Paris, in New York, all these cross-cultural experiences, how have they shaped your philosophy and your approach to design and to life?
Oh, I love that question. I often say being Turkish is great training for being a designer, because I really believe in resolving dichotomies, and dichotomies are opposing things that normally cancel each other out. But if you can make them coexist, you can create new and extraordinary value. So being Turkish, you're at the intersection of Europe and Asia, and you live in a culture that's both incredibly old and very new. It can be very conservative and at the same time very advanced. So there are always these constant contrasts. And I feel like design is like that as well. Often we're asked to create high performance products at low cost. Less is more, which everybody knows. These are all dichotomy resolutions. And I find that in my work, that's what I always strive for. And I think the roots of that come from Turkey.
When you're looking at the whole design process, which often takes a multitude of iterations, it's a lot of experimentation and sometimes failures, starting over again. Can you share a specific challenge or failure that ultimately led to a valuable insight and brought joy actually to your life and to your work?
Oh, yes. I too many to name, but since you mentioned design process has these iterations, I think that's one of the key things, and very fortunate too, about design, that you don't go from 0 to 100. You go in phases. So there's always like the idea phase and the concept design, refinement, and then eventually your idea, if it doesn't fail through those phases, eventually can make it to the market. And that notion of you start with an idea, and that idea in the beginning is quite rough. You do idea sketches, and you can do many, you go diverge on something. And in the beginning, there are no wrong ideas. And that's really important, I find. And then slowly you refine it and you converge, you refine it and you converge until you have the final product. But that really helps me with my own life as well. So when you think in terms of a failure that helped me maybe see things differently and changed my life, there are multiple things that I could talk about, but the one that really was a big fork in the road for me was the 2008 economic downturn. And when that happened, we had a very successful product design firm, industrial design firm in New York, working with amazing clients. And as you mentioned, winning lots of awards. So I was like, this is not going to touch us, fine. But of course it did. And it was out of my control, but we were an external design studio to almost all our clients. And they all cut their budgets. And the first thing they did is like they took out all the external studios and resources, us included. It didn't matter. And I found in that moment, I found myself with a family to support. We had 3 young kids and all the responsibility, and I really didn't know what to do. And I turned to design, actually with the help of one of my dear friends, Leah Kaplan, who saw the opportunity in this challenge. I was really frustrated because I had all this time in my hands and I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm not useful. And she said, well, look, maybe it's a good thing you have all this time in your hands. Why don't you use this time to think about how you think, because you think differently. And that was the beginning of I felt like I think differently. It's true, but I don't quite know how I do that. And so I sat down, and her encouragement really made a world of difference, because I felt like at least one person still believes in me. And I started every day mapping out how I think, and how at that point I had maybe 20 years of industrial design experience. So I tried to remember, like, what do I do when I have a new project? And I realized that I often deconstruct things and I look at what it's made up of. And in deconstructing something, I break the preconceptions that I have about this has to go with this, and then start to see the parts and then connect them differently and reconstruct eventually into a new idea, a new concept. And so that became how, you know, I I ended up articulating how I think. It turned out to be very useful for me, and I wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been for failing to recognize that the economic downturn was going to affect us all, and that I wasn't ahead of the wave, basically, and so it almost swallowed us. But that was the beginning of deconstruction, reconstruction, which now has become the red thread across all our work.
It's also highlighted in your book, and you now have an entire process whereby you're helping people redesign their life through design thinking. And I was wondering if you could share with us, beyond the construction and reconstruction concepts that you've just shared, can you share with us a bit more details about that process when you're accompanying individuals in rethinking about new ways at looking at their lives and exploring new possibilities?
Absolutely. So I believe that our life is our biggest project. It's our biggest design project. And like a design project, it's full of problems and constraints and needs and wants that are opposing each other. You have different stakeholders that you need to manage. It's just like a design project. And so once I realized that, I thought, well, if I have a design process and our life is a design project, can I apply this process to our life? And that's how it all started, where I wanted to experiment applying deconstruction, reconstruction to our life and see. It was like a proof point. Does this work? And can I do it? Can I teach it to people? So I started it as an experiment. I was my first guinea pig and I tried it and it seemed to work. And then a friend of mine encouraged me to do a workshop. She said, well, why don't you invite people to come design the life they love? And so we did that. And so it's so interesting, Andrea. There seems to be an organic connection between life and design. When I tell people, I teach people how to design their life, they're so attracted to it and they want to do it. And what I've realized over time, now that I've done it with like thousands and thousands of people, that people are natural born designers, but they need a process, just like I need a process. So what I do is I show them how you can deconstruct your life and reconstruct it. And they're extraordinarily creative once they give themselves permission. Often that idea of permission has to come from a moment in our life, and we all have these different thresholds, right? You're in a moment of change and you're changing, but you don't know what you're changing towards. That's when designing your life is ideal. And these moments it could happen when you're finishing high school or college. So you're moving out of your family, getting a job. That's one of the key moments in life where you can design your life. And it helps you imagine your future based on what you know today. Another time could be in midlife when you've done most of the things that you set out to do, and you might have a great job, you're making a living, you might have a family, and you start to wonder, is this it? Is there anything else, anything more to life than this? And you start to feel this kind of, there is a feeling of like where you start questioning yourself. And that's another great moment where you could say, well, what's my self-made purpose? What's the purpose of my life? And again, use design tools to think about that. So I didn't quite answer your question about like, what do you actually do? I think for that, the book is a great tool, or coming to one of my workshops. But I just wanted to tell you where it comes from and how it works.
Actually, I was wondering if you can potentially just clarify the last points you just mentioned: ready-made purpose and self-made purpose. Purpose is such an important reality in our lives, and some individuals that may be struggling to find their purpose, I think, would appreciate any further clarifications that you can provide so we can truly understand what the differences are.
I'm so glad you asked me that question, because we do work with, especially we work with corporations and teams and people who are working and struggle with that sense of purpose. So I'll go back a little bit. We did a year-long study research with older people who are in their 60s and older with the SCAN Foundation. And that became the foundation actually of my book, the one that you have. And thank you for that. Design the Long Life You Love. And what we did is we helped people who are older design their lives and co-design life, whether it's their legacy or finances or love life, friendship, well-being. And from that, we learned how they think about life, because these are really wise people who have the most experience living. And so it was great to learn from them. And one of the topics was purpose. And what we realized is most of our life, when you track your life from 0 to 100, let's say, across purpose, most of your life is you have ready-made purpose that comes from social structures like school, family, work, and hobbies, and they give you a sense of purpose. But as you get older, either these structures recede, or you've done them and you're hungry for something else. And that's when you need self-made structure. And often we talk about midlife crisis, and this is a big part of midlife crisis, where it's an existential question of like, who am I and why am I here? And self-made purpose is a great answer to that. Self-made purpose is purpose that comes from within, versus ready-made purpose comes from the outside. And self-made purpose is accessible because creativity, learning, teaching, fighting for what you believe in, helping others, receiving help, these are all things that can increase your sense of self-made purpose. When you help someone, whether it's part of your work, or outside of your work, and you're at the service of others, that really increases your sense of like, I'm here to make somebody else's life better. It's a key point, of where purpose comes from. When you create something out of nothing, whether that might not be your primary occupation, but if you play music, or you sing, or you draw, or you knit, this also gives you, because it's creativity and you're creating something, it allows that sense of meaning in your life. When you teach, when you learn, it's one of the chapters in my book that I talk about, and you pulled out the best part, which is, if you're feeling lost, and I can totally relate to this, because there has been points in my life where I'm like, what's the meaning of my life? In these things, like how to create self-made purpose, has helped me and has helped others feel like, and it's not something static. That's the beauty of it. It changes over time, but especially when you're older, this is incredibly helpful. But it, I think, helps younger people as well, people who are now, coming out of college, and who want to succeed right away. That's what I find with a lot of these young people in their 20s. Like, if they haven't gotten their best job, if they're not making a lot of money, they feel like they've missed the point. And the point is not that at all. The point really comes from within, and you can create it. And it doesn't have to take a lot of your time, but it really is a great way to center yourself.
Thank you so much for sharing. And as you're diving deeper into the topic of purpose, for me, there's a strong connection with love and joy, and living fully our life. And I want to go back to one of the points you highlighted earlier, which actually connects with a recent message that you had in a newsletter that you just posted. I quote you, you said, "The work we love, small or big, paid or unpaid, prestigious or not, is a transfer of love." I absolutely love this, because I feel that that transfer of love is also a transfer of joy. And I was wondering if we could just dive a little bit more into this topic, please.
Thank you. This has two sources. One comes from design, because I always felt that when I designed something, and I've designed many things from toilet seats. I'm known as the queen of toilets. That is a title that I cherish. I've designed office systems, concept cars, kitchen gadgets, and tools. But often I'm not with the user. So I design something and somebody else buys it. I'm not in the room with them when they're using it. And I thought, I always believe that a successful product is one where the user can feel my excitement about this product, my love for it, my joy in creating it. And they can then, even though I'm not there to explain it, there's something inside of that product that makes them feel the same joy, the same love. And it could be simply intuitive. So this is one thing that comes from my understanding of what I do as an industrial designer. But more recently, I've really been thinking about, what is it about loving our work? Because so many of us seem to struggle with doing work that we don't like. So I wanted to understand that we don't always have a choice. And even when we have a choice, work cannot be always joyful. And so, as I was pondering on that, I realized two things. One is, just like you quoted, work is not necessarily a job. There's so many things that we do that, whether it's caregiving or taking care of our children, or teaching someone, or washing dishes, there are many different kinds of work. And what I realize is the difference between love or not love is that transfer of love. That if it, anything you do, if you think about it as, I'm doing this to help someone else, it's at the service of somebody else, it brings you joy, it brings somebody else joy, that is an expression of love. That's the transfer of love. So it goes from you to them, but then it returns back to you because you start to enjoy what you do more, because it's not about you, it's about somebody else. So I also say, the work you love starts with you, ends with someone else. And I think often we forget that. I certainly do. It's so easy to go into the mindset of me, 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 me. And I find that as soon as I can switch it to, this is not about me, this is about the receiver of the email, the receiver of the talk I'm giving, the receiver of the book I wrote, and maybe it touched their life, that's the transfer of love. It changes everything. So I just wanted to share that with everyone who's thinking and worrying about, like, am I doing the work I love?
So, as you're talking about the transfer of love, what comes to mind is sustainability and how the choices that are made at the design or the creation level can have a huge impact on existing and future generations. And I was wondering if you could share your view on the integration of sustainability, but also emerging technologies and AI in the design world.
In terms of sustainability, I was very lucky because I worked with Herman Miller in the States for more than 20 years. And they, even before sustainability was talked about, established sustainability protocols. And I designed office systems for them. And it was always with the understanding of, like, it's cradle to cradle, and how do you create something that you can completely take apart, uses minimum materials and sustainable materials. So that was a great training for me. And now, what, in terms of sustainability, it's Bibi Sek, my husband and partner, who does a lot in sustainability. And so, I love the work that he creates with garbage that's collected in Senegal and West Africa, with Waste and Hope, the brand. And they turn all the garbage into these beautiful things. So it's kind of like alchemy. And I think we now have, as both designers and users, a much better understanding and sensibility towards sustainable design. And especially, I find, in talking to young people, sustainability has become second nature to them, in terms of how they design or how they pick the things that they want to use. That gives me a lot of hope. In terms of AI, I think that it is one of those things that is both bright and dark. So it kind of goes back and forth. On one hand, I find it incredibly useful because it saves time, and there are things that you could do with that time. So it's almost like it's like Google in a way. When Google came out and research became incredibly easy, but it would tell you, like, you would still need to read something, fully. And now with AI, it's like one step further, where, you're working on something and you're like, you can almost ask an assistant, like, could you show me how to write this, or the cliff notes of this book. So on one hand, it saves time, but on the other hand, I feel like, all the copyright issues and originality issues, recognition of IP. These are big issues that we need to resolve, and because it's so new that we haven't really we dived in and we haven't really looked at all the ways that it's going to affect us. So even when I'm putting things into AI to help me, I also at the same time feel like I'm feeding the beast, that my questions are going into the world and is becoming this part of the bigger whole. And I wonder, well, what does that mean? It's like I'm working on something confidential or that I have the IP for, and yet I put it in, Chat GPT to translate it into a paragraph. So I feel that it's both a great advantage, but at the same time, like with a lot of technology, uh, it takes us a decade or two to realize we see the positive sides quickly, but it takes us much longer what we've given up in return for the advantages. So I think something similar is going to happen with AI.
When we look at joy in your life, can you share with us what are the biggest source of joy for you today?
The biggest sources of joy is, of course, my family, like my kids and my husband, my friends, my elders there. When I meditate on things that give me joy, I find myself always going back to family dinners or celebrations or walking down the street with my kids. There's such a kind of human piece of that being with your loved ones. The second piece is, I draw a lot of joy from my work, and I feel very lucky to be able to if I have a piece of paper and pen and a project, I can be incredibly joyful. And part of that is the activity of discovery and creativity and being in the flow automatically creates that joy of you're trying to improve on something, you're trying to come up with something, that connecting with something greater than yourself definitely gives me joy. Being a designer is all about seeing the same things differently, and that's kind of the center of creativity. How can I look at what everyone else is looking at and see something new in that? In this notion of creating something new or imagining something new based on what you know today. Um, and that requires a shift in perspective. And often I find that my joy comes from a shift in perspective, because we have all moments that are less joyful, or problems or challenges, or we judge others, we judge ourselves. And that's the part where I found greater joy in using that design capacity that we also find in stoicism or in meditation and mindfulness, of um, seeing the same thing differently, letting go of judgment, not deciding whether something is good or bad. Those things have helped me an incredible amount as well in being joyful. And so I just wanted to mention that as well. There is, it's not that everything is joyful, it's just how I look at it that's become more joyful.
And I know you have recently obtained your black belt, which is quite an achievement. Can you share your journey and why this was important for you?
Yes, that's something that gives me joy as well. I mean, the thing about that I love about karate is it really helps me be in the moment. And, when you do karate, you can't think of much anything else. And that sense of being in the present is incredibly satisfying. But where it comes from is I took my kids to karate when they were little, and I wanted them to learn to defend themselves, and they weren't interested. But I fell in love with it, just seeing the movements. And the sensei who was at the dojo said, "You absolutely need to try this." And I'm like, "I'll do that another day." And he's like, "No, no, you're gonna try this right now." So he gave me a kata gi, which is the what you wear, and I did My kids did it, and then half an hour later, I did it. They never continued, I continued. And so that's my karate story. And I have an amazing sensei in Turkey, and we continue to train online. And it took me 2.5 years to get my, maybe 3 years to get my black belt, which I really didn't think I could ever do. And that's the other thing I love about it, is that you start as a white belt, you you practice. It's very humbling, but it gives you hope that if you practice and practice something and eventually you get better at it. That's my karate story, and I highly recommend it.
And it's so hilarious that you've shared your journey, because also when I signed up our kids for karate, they also said, well, you have to come with us. They didn't want to do karate without me. So I ended up being one of the students among other children, if you wish. So
I love it.
so it was hilarious, and it's funny because I when I read about you getting your black belt, I said, "Wow, this is an inspiration. I should go back to what really inspired me, because indeed there's so much discipline. There was a calmness to the techniques, and I almost regret stopping just because there was a million things happening, and of course many things shifted, but now you have given me the inspiration to go back and potentially aspire to get the black belt, so thank you.
I hope you do that in, because that happened to me as well. I stopped, and when you stop, it's so hard to get back into it. But I missed it so much. I guess the presence and the movements and everything about karate, it just was this yearning until I found my current sensei, and I started from zero again and started, building it up. But the other thing that I wanted to share with you about karate is the way it forms my worldview, in terms of being, this beginner's point of view, that no matter how far you get in karate, you're still a beginner. It's just a different degree. But the other thing is, it made me realize in karate, there's something called a feint. So I just want to talk a little bit to you and your audience about that. And the feint is when you have to be a black belt to learn it. So that was really interesting. But it's doing a fake movement to pull your opponent's attention to this point and then actually attack them from a different point. And it's kind of like what Muhammad Ali would do, right? He would show you, maybe a right, his right hand, and then hit you with the left hand. It's similar. But I was in a class with my sensei, Levent Suman, and he showed me, look, this is a design fent, you do this. And when your opponent's attention goes there, there's a space that opens, and you use that space to actually attack from a different direction. And it's very impactful. And I thought, that's what we do as designers. We actually, we're constantly fighting our preconceptions, the way we think things need to be. And you need to break out of those things to be able to think fresh and anew. And the way to attack that is, what you do with creativity is actually you trick your brain, but for your own good. And so I realized, I was like, oh my God, this is what design does. It pulls your attention, and you think you're thinking about that. And then when your attention is there, your conscious attention, you're actually, you redirect that attention, and you think about something from scratch in a new way. And that's how, like, inspiration works. That's how metaphors work. That's how a lot of design tools that we use work. And I was like, okay, now, through karate, I understood what I do as a designer. And in karate, it's feint, and in my now new language, it's, what we do is design feint.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. If you had to design a product or an experience that would bring more joy to people's lives, what would it be, and how would it embody your values and your design philosophy?
I just want to go back and say, I think I already designed it. And because my answer would be a good toilet seat, because it's something that we all need and we all sit on multiple times a day. It's a neglected product. So most toilet seats are designed as a cover for the china. So it has no relationship to your body. And what I did was to redesign it like a chair so that it's designed for your body and it's large enough so that you can sit comfortably. And it also it was for Toto, so it warms up. The seat is a warm seat, and it has a little shower. And the combination of all that, sitting on a comfortable toilet seat that's warm, that allows you to also, have better hygiene, is incredibly joyful. And that's the kind of thing that there are all these products that we assume they need to be a certain way. But when you can break your preconceptions about it and think, oh, a toilet seat is actually a seat, and a seat needs to be ergonomic, and it has to hold your body. Let me think about it from the perspective of a seat. It it changes everything. There are people out there who don't know I've designed that, who sit on their toilet and feel just good, but they don't know why. And that, you know, so those are the things that really interest me, things that are maybe forgotten objects that can be, if they've rethought from the perspective of the end user, could bring people joy. It could also be in little details. Sometimes cleaning a product, for example, that you have is really annoying, and making that product easy to clean and therefore joyful could unlock that piece.
It's so funny that you've talked about the impact you've had on the evolution of the toilet. And it's funny because we were just recently with the kids and with my husband in Japan. And it was the second time we were going in literally a couple of months because we just loved it. And although I had been there many, many times, the toilets were always an inspiration. And there was the same fascination that emerged when my kids and my husband were exposed to that. So now I'm happy that we have had the pleasure to talk about your impact in sparking joy in everyday places that indeed often may have been forgotten in terms of potential improvements that could be made. So a big thank you for that inspiration.
I think we have a lot of serendipitous moments between you and I, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, so Aisha, any final words of inspiration that you'd like to share for our audience when it relates to joy or designing their life?
I'm constantly learning how to be more joyful. And one of the things that I've learned comes from my teacher and mentor, Sri Kumar Rao. He's taught me a lot in terms of seeing the same things differently. And one of the things that he talks about is being aware of miracles. And this is independent of your faith, not necessarily religious, but it's about things that happen that are just like the serendipity of our conversation, of how there are all these overlaps are little miracles, and being aware of those things and attuned to them makes you more joyful. And the more you see them, the more you see them. And sometimes it's, you know, things like you need a cab, and it's rush hour, there's no way you're going to find a cab, and yet suddenly there's a cab that rolls over and picks you up, and you're relieved, and that's a little miracle. So I would say, and it's a learned skill to recognize, you get these breaks every day of, something going your way. And often we're so concentrated on things not going our way. It's really a great practice to try and be more aware of things that go our way and celebrate them and say, I even started a miracle list just to make sure, like, at least once a day I find something. And then a friend of mine taught me, well, Aisha, and if there are no miracles, just take a deep breath. And that was my friend Scott Osman. And now we joke about it, and I'm like, I just take a deep breath, and it is a miracle, you know. So yes, that's one thing that comes to my mind.
Thank you so much, Ayse. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you, such an inspiration. And this has been very joyful for me on many, many levels. So thank you.
Andrea, thank you for bringing joy into our lives. You're doing something amazing. There must be a lot of self-made purpose in you.
Indeed. Thank you so much.